everyone, it's Emma. Today I'm going to do my favorite books of 2016. Somebody on Instagram suggested that I do 16 books since it's 2016, and since picking 10 books out of 100 is literally impossible for me, I did 16 books. The other reason that this was difficult is because I read a lot of series this year, and if I picked one favorite book from all of the amazing series that I read, it would all be series. Another time I'll do a favorite series video. These are in no particular order. Ranking books is impossible for me. It's like picking a favorite child. So I'm not going to do that. The first book is A Tree Grows in Brooklyn by Betty Smith. Basically, we follow this girl, Francie, through a lot of her life, through a lot of her childhood, up all the way until she's 18 or 19. It takes place in Brooklyn, and I believe it's the 40s. I know that's when the book was published, but I always forget when this book takes place. Anyways, we follow this girl, Francie, and her family. Her father is an alcoholic, and it's really just about their life and the struggles and the joys that they have. But it is so beautifully written, and Francie is a writer, so I related to her a lot. She has this struggle of loving school and loving books, but not really knowing what to do with it and if that's a legitimate thing. And so I related to that a lot, and I just found it to be very beautiful and poignant. The next book is one that I do not talk about enough on this channel, and that is Name of the Wind by Patrick Rothfuss. I absolutely loved it. Actually, A Wise Man's Fear should probably be the book that I'm talking about because I think I enjoyed A Wise Man's Fear better, but I liked Name of the Wind and A Wise Man's Fear for different reasons. A Wise Man's Fear is the second one, and it's also just harder to hold up, which is another reason why I'm going to hold up Name of the Wind, because this book is really heavy. Name of the Wind is a fantasy series, and we follow Kvothe, and when it starts, he's maybe 9 years old, he's a kid, and by the end of the second book, he's kind of almost an adult teenager. Kvothe is such a good character. I just love him. He's so flawed and interesting. A lot of the books center around the university, and it's a university for magic, but it's a very specific type of magic. It's not the kind of magic like Harry Potter where you just wave a wand and it happens. They explain how it works. One of my favorite things about these books is the way that Patrick Rothfuss describes music. My family is a very musical family. I've grown up amongst musicians and singers and performers, so it's something that's really special to me. There's one scene in particular that I cried actual tears. It was so beautifully written, and Patrick Rothfuss's prose is just kind of unprecedented right now. He's in his own sphere. There's no one else that I love in the same way that I love Patrick Rothfuss. It's so good, it's worth it, even if it's a little bit outside of your comfort zone. It's worth it, especially once you get past the first 200 pages. By the way, I don't think I said this. These are not books that came out this year. These are books that I read this year. Actually, I think most of them did not come out this year. That being said, the next book is Eyre by Sarah J. Maas. I am a huge Sarah J. Maas fan. This series I have a lot more issues with than the ACOTAR series, but this book in particular was just amazing for me. The character development that Selena goes through in this book, I loved it a lot, and I related to Selena's struggles a lot. I think that's something Sarah J. Maas does really well, is that she portrays realistic depression and anxiety in a fantasy setting. I wasn't sure if I was going to put Empire of Storms or Eyre on this list because I really loved Empire of Storms. I know a lot of people didn't, but I really enjoyed it. But because of the character development that Selena goes through, this one is really my favorite. I think that way at the beginning of my channel, I made a book talk for Eyre. I will link that down below, but I'm sure it's really embarrassing and awkward because it was one of my early videos. The next one is one that I read right at the end of 2016, and it's a graphic novel. It's Reindeer Boy by Cassandra Jean. I love Cassandra Jean's artwork, and I just kind of fell head over heels in love with this story. It was really cute and festive. It's just a beautiful graphic novel. Basically, this is about this girl who Santa's reindeer in human form start attending her high school. It's really sweet, and I would really recommend it. The next book is The Princess Saves Herself in This One by Amanda Lovelace. It is a poetry book. It's split into 4 parts. The first part is the princess, and then the damsel, third part the queen, and the fourth part is you. So we follow her story through poetry in these different parts, kind of adolescence through adulthood, and then you is advice that she has for the readers. This book just really touched my heart. I cried. I cry a lot in books, if you guys can't tell. I think what she did really well that I enjoyed is that she poured her pain into her work But when you read this, you feel like she's healed and she went back and wrote this story so that you could read it and relate, and so she could help other people. It's another one that I've suggested to so many people, and I think if you haven't read it, you need to get yourself a copy on Amazon. The author saw some pictures that I'd taken of this book on my Instagram and Tumblr, and she contacted me and asked if she could send me a book plate, which I haven't stuck inside the book because I have heard a rumor that she's going to republish this hardback copy, and if that is true, I want the book plate to go in that copy, not in this one. Although I didn't really sort these, this next one is definitely in my top 3, probably. And it's The Kingsmen by Nora Sakavic. This is the last book in the All for the Game trilogy, with Foxhole Court trilogy. I heard about this series because people who like the Raven Cycle also tend to read this series. This is the 3rd book because the 3rd one was my favorite. But in this series, we follow Neil Jastin as he is new to this sports team. It's a made-up sport called Exy, and the sports team's kind of made up of kids who are all delinquents in some way. All of these characters are incredible. I love Neil so much. His development is some of the best character development I've seen in a long time. I talk about these books kind of often, and I try to mention every time that there are a lot of triggers in these books. If you are sensitive to those kind of things, make sure to be aware of that, because I think there are triggers for almost anything. There's a lot of violence, there's self-harm and suicide, rape, sexual abuse, any kind of abuse. Nora Sakavic does not do this in an exploitive way. She shows a lot of healing that the characters go through, so I actually found it to be cathartic and not, bring my energy down or anything like that. This is going to be one of my favorite series for a long time. I just am so attached to these characters and the way that Nora Sakavic writes. Next is The Night Circus by Eyre Morgenstern. I had been meaning to read this book for quite a while because people who like the same books as me tend to also like The Night Circus. I was correct. I loved this book. It will definitely be a favorite forever. The way it's written is so beautiful. This story centers around this circus that 2 magicians, magic wielders, are using as the backdrop for this competition that they have going on. There's a lot of mystery and you're not really sure how the competition works the whole time, but what is really amazing about this book is the way everything is described. When it's describing people walking through the circus, I felt like I was there. There's this tent that is a snow garden, and I felt like the temperature in the room dropped when I was reading it. Or when it would describe the food that people ate, I felt like I could smell it and taste it. It was so crystal clear in my mind. I would 100% recommend you go buy it. Next, I have 2 books by the same author. It won't be a surprise that I have 2 books by this author. The first one is Ruin and Rising by Leigh Bardugo. I read Six of Crows, then the Grisha trilogy, and then Crooked Kingdom all this year in that order. I am so happy that I finished this series because I was hesitant to go into it. I've heard a lot of mixed reviews. The Grisha trilogy takes place in Ravka. Ravka is kind of Russian-based, and I really enjoy reading Russian-based fantasy books. I think there's something really magical about them. Ruin and Rising is the last book in the Grisha trilogy. I think these books get better as they go. All of the books, I just had a lot of fun reading. It didn't end the way that I wanted it to, but overall, I really enjoyed this book, and it was one of my favorites of the year when I'm really honest with myself. One of the main reasons for that is because this character, Nikolai Lantsov, is just one of my favorite characters ever. I love him so much. I don't have a lot of book boyfriends, but Nikolai Lantsov is one of the best book boyfriends. Some of the characters in this trilogy, they do show up in Crooked Kingdom, and although you don't have to read this trilogy to understand Crooked Kingdom, I think you'll enjoy it a lot more because when I read Crooked Kingdom, just fangirled so hard when those characters showed up, and it was so much fun. It was like reading crossover fan fiction because I was like, these characters are meeting the Six of Crows characters, and it was just really cool. This one will be no surprise, and I think if I have to pick, it's probably my favorite book of the year. I voted for it on Goodreads. It's Crooked Kingdom by Leigh Bardugo. This book is perfection. I don't think I've ever read an end to a series or trilogy or duology or whatever. The last book, I've never read one that I was this satisfied with. It didn't go how I thought it would because that would have been boring. I had no complaints. There was nothing that I said, I wish she hadn't done that. I wish it hadn't happened like that. I love these characters so much. Their development just is great. Kaz and Inej's relationship is one of my favorite things about this book. I did make a full video review for this. I will link it down below because I literally talked about everything that I loved in that review. The next book is another classic, and it's Jane Eyre by Charlotte Bronte. I'm not sure why I didn't read it until this year, because these types of books is like all I read when I was a teenager. Jane is such a good heroine to read about. I just love her. She's so spunky and hilarious. Her observations of other people are very witty and sharp, and she is very honest in her own thoughts. Jane Eyre is kind of like a classic gothic romance novel, and I keep thinking about it, thinking about the characters and the way it was written and some of the observations that were made throughout it. So for that reason, it's one of my favorites. It's definitely a favorite classic. I'm really glad that I read it this year. I'm getting towards the end, I promise. The next book is The Final Empire by Brandon Sanderson. I think Brandon Sanderson created this magical system that is so interesting and unique, so easy to understand, which is not always the case when I read adult fantasy books. This is the first book in a trilogy, and we follow two main characters through this book. The first one is Vin, who is a 16-year-old street thief, and the other one is Kelsier, who is kind of a bit of a legend. I also did a full review on this one if you want to check that out, and I'll put the link in the descriptions. The next book is The Secret History by Donna Tartt. This book has had a lot of hype recently, so I was a little bit unsure going into it. This book is about these young men and women in college, and they have this one professor that kind of presides over all of their schooling. There's a specific way of thinking and a worldview that he teaches them, but they kind of take it a step too far, and right at the beginning of the book they tell you, first page, so this isn't a spoiler, that they kill one of their friends, and over the course of the book you see that play out. I really enjoyed it. The characters are really interesting and morally gray, and I really enjoy those type of characters. It's just another one that I've continued to think about. There's so many quotable lines. This is one of the most quotable books I've ever read. The writing is really beautiful. It's kind of dark. It is not a happy feeling book, but it really reminded me of F. Scott Fitzgerald, and I love F. Scott Fitzgerald. I love all of his books that I've read. And this was like a modern F. Scott Fitzgerald book, so I really liked that. Next is another book that I don't really talk about much on my channel, but it's a very popular one, and it's Lady Midnight by Cassandra Clare. This is the first book in the Dark Artifices, which is her most recent trilogy in the Shadowhunter world. We follow Emma Carstairs, who has grown up as a Shadowhunter, so she's very skilled and she's not new to the world. I think for that reason, this may end up being my favorite trilogy. We'll see when the other books come out, but I have a feeling. We also follow the fairy world a lot, which we only see in small glimpses in the other books. I also like how huge this book is. I just really enjoyed this book. I think it's because it's in the same world that I already like, but her writing has improved a lot. This was just one of the best first books in a YA series that I've ever read. I just can't wait to see where it goes. I'm so excited for Lord of Shadows. On the same day that Lord of Shadows is coming out, I'm going to see Hamilton, so I'm probably going to die of excitement and you guys won't see me anymore. The next one is This Savage Song by Victoria Schwab. I've talked about this book a couple times, but it really was just one of my favorite books. The world building that she did in this is so cool. This book is about this city that's kind of split into humans and monsters, and we follow a character on each side. So Kate is the human, and August is the monster, but the whole theme is, if you're a monster, does that make you monstrous? And if you're a human, does that make you better than the monsters, morally? And that I found really interesting. Monsters are physically created from acts of violence, and the whole idea that your actions have physical consequences, the different types of monsters and how they kind of reflect the level of violence. The other thing I really liked is that there wasn't any romance in this book. You kept feeling where it could have gone cliche because obviously August and Kate's paths cross, but she never went there. Victoria Schwab always seemed like she kept swerving the other direction. The next book is one that I think is on a lot of people's favorite books of the year lists, and that's A Court of Mist and Fury by Sarah J. Maas. This book is amazing. I really had no issues with. I thought it was incredible. The amount of character development that Feyre goes through and her journey was so inspiring. Feyre really deals with PTSD and depression and anxiety in this book, and it just felt so well done. Again, Sarah J. Maas really does that well. There were so many lines that I copied down and I would go back and reread. I read this book twice this year, which I don't do that a lot. I just can't wait to read the last book. I'm sure is going to just destroy me. The last book is kind of a cheat because really this whole series was a favorite of this year, and it's going to be no surprise, you guys. Like, let's just take a second to guess what Emma's favorite series of the year was. If you guessed, let me know down in the comments because I'm a little repetitive when it comes to this series. It's The Raven Cycle by Maggie Stiefvater. Really, I can't pick a favorite book. I keep trying to pick a favorite book, and every time I kind of go back to The Dream Thieves because Ronan is my favorite of the characters in the series, and we follow Ronan a lot in the second one. The way that Maggie Stiefvater writes is just so magical, and these characters I am beyond in love with. While I was reading it, I had this like heartbreaking feeling that it wasn't real. I wanted to be Blue Sergeant so badly. In this series, we follow Blue Sergeant, who is kind of this like short, angry feminist girl. And in her town, there's this private all boys school called Agliombe. She really hates Agliombe boys, but she kind of gets pulled into this group of 4 other Agliombe boys, and it's like the story of their friendship. A lot of this book is really focused on their friendships, which is something I loved, but it's also their magical quest to find this dead Welsh king. Maggie Stiefvater does a great job at addressing multiple different types of trauma in these books. These characters are very complicated. I also really like the adults. It's unique to this series how much you follow the adults. Like, some of the adults are as much a main character as the kids. Honestly, I can't stop thinking about this series. Those are my top 16 favorite books of 2016. I had a great reading year this year. I read so many books that are going to be favorites, and I just think a lot of them made a big impact on me. Let me know down in the comments some of your favorite books that you read this year. If you read any of these this year, what you thought of them. If you enjoyed this video, please hit the subscribe button. I'm Miss Emma Reads a Lot on all of my social media, which I will link in the description box below. Thanks for watching, and I will see you guys soon with a new video.